You have 30 days to move out, my mother said with a smirk, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against my kitchen counter in a deliberate rhythm that matched my rising pulse. We sold your apartment to Megan. I stood in my sun-filled kitchen, feeling an unexpected calm wash over me despite the ambush. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor that Eleanor, my grandmother, had helped me restore during her final months. This same space had witnessed countless milestones. My first breakthrough in biomedical research, the late nights I'd spent reviewing clinical data, and most importantly, the precious final days with my grandmother. My name is Evelyn Reed, and at 35, I never imagined facing eviction from my own home by my own family, especially not while recovering from the lab accident that had kept me on medical leave for the past 3 months. Don't look so shocked, my brother Garrett chimed in from beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around his wife Megan's shoulders. His designer watch caught the sunlight, a recent gift from our parents, no doubt. You barely use this place anyway, always locked away in your lab, working on those medical devices. Megan needs a proper home now that the baby's coming. The baby, of course. Megan's pregnancy, barely showing beneath her carefully selected maternity blouse, had become the family's latest excuse for giving my brother everything he wanted, just as they had throughout our childhood. I took a deliberate sip from my coffee mug, savoring both the rich flavor and the momentary flash of uncertainty that crossed my mother's face at my composed reaction. I don't understand why you're being so calm about this, Vivian, my mother, continued, pulling out a leather portfolio filled with official-looking papers. Your father and I maintained our names on the deed when you moved in after graduate school, remember? For tax purposes. Her smile turned predatory as she tapped a manicured nail against a signature line. We signed the final papers yesterday. Megan and Garrett get possession in 30 days. Harold has already arranged for the movers. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with my grandmother Eleanor just 3 months before she passed. She'd been sitting at this very kitchen island, her eyes sharp and alert despite her failing health. They'll try to take it from you, she'd warned, her voice still carrying the authority of the educator she'd once been. Vivian never did forgive me for not giving her control of these buildings when she married your father. The apartment had been in my grandmother's family for generations. The entire building, actually. A beautiful pre-war structure in one of the city's most historically significant neighborhoods. My mother had grown up here, always assuming she'd inherit it all. Instead, my grandmother had different plans. I see how you've used the research grant money, she told me that day, watching as I prepared her medication with the same precision I applied in my lab. Creating medical devices that actually help people, building something meaningful, not like Garrett with his endless failed startups or Megan with her abandoned teaching career. She'd reached into her bag with trembling hands, pulling out a sealed envelope with my name written in her elegant script. Keep this somewhere secure. Don't reveal anything until absolutely necessary. Now, standing in my kitchen facing my family's betrayal, I felt the weight of that digital drive and envelope in my desk drawer upstairs. The documents had been safely uploaded to my secure cloud storage the same day she'd given them to me. Actually, I said, my voice steady and clinical, the same tone I used when presenting research findings. There's something important we need to discuss before this conversation continues. I walked to my home office, hearing their impatient sighs behind me. My mother had never approved of me converting the second bedroom into a workspace. A proper lady needs a proper guest room, she'd complained repeatedly, dismissing my need for a home research space. When I returned, I carried my tablet and a worn folder containing backup printouts. Eleanor had taught me to always have physical copies of important documents. Before we discuss my supposed eviction, you might want to review these files. What's that? Megan asked, speaking for the first time. She looked uncomfortable, one hand resting protectively on her barely visible baby bump, her eyes darting nervously between my face and the tablet. "The actual property deed," I said calmly, placing the tablet on the counter and opening the digital documents with my fingerprint. "And verification of ownership for the adjacent building as well." My mother's face drained of color as she read the electronic records displayed on the screen. "Two properties, both transferred to my name 3 years ago, digitally signed and notarized with timestamps and verification codes, bearing my grandmother's distinct electronic signature. The buildings had never legally belonged to my parents. Eleanor had strategically kept their names on certain rental agreements to maintain family peace, but the properties had passed directly to me through a carefully executed digital estate plan. This can't possibly be legal," my mother sputtered, her composed facade cracking beneath the weight of irrefutable evidence. "I assure you it's entirely legal," I said, swiping to display additional documentation. "Mr. Patterson handled everything personally, including video recordings of grandmother signing and explaining her decisions." The mention of my grandmother's longtime attorney made my mother flinch visibly. "You might want to investigate the validity of your purported sale to Megan and Garrett. It's legally impossible to sell property you don't actually own." Garrett snatched the tablet, his face flushing an alarming shade of red as he frantically scrolled through the documents. "You knew about this the whole time. You let us proceed with the sale negotiations." "I became aware of your plans approximately 3 weeks ago," I admitted, maintaining my professional demeanor. Eleanor always emphasized that it's more revealing to allow people to demonstrate their true intentions through actions rather than words. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. Megan had sunk onto one of my bar stools, looking physically ill. My mother continued staring at the digital deed displayed on the tablet as though she could alter its contents through sheer determination. "You should have told us immediately," she finally said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Much like you should have informed me about selling the home I've lived in for the past decade," I counted, feeling a rare flash of emotion break through my composed exterior. "The home where I personally cared for Eleanor when none of you made yourselves available." The memories surfaced with painful clarity. The nights I'd balanced my research with grandmother's medical care, Garrett consistently too engaged with his latest doomed venture to assist my parents conveniently traveling during the most difficult periods of her illness. I had put my promising research on hold while they carried on with their lives, confident in their assumption that the buildings would eventually fall under their control. "What options do we have now?" Megan asked quietly, her teacher's training evident in her measured tone. "We've already sold our current apartment based on this arrangement." I felt an unexpected wave of sympathy for her. Megan had always seemed unwillingly swept along by my family's manipulative dynamics, constantly trying to please everyone at the expense of her own identity. "I'm not without compassion," I said, my voice softening slightly. "The building adjacent to this one has a recently vacated unit on the 3rd floor with identical specifications. It needs renovation, but you're welcome to rent it at fair market value." "Rent?" Garrett exploded, his face now dangerously flushed. "From my own sister? Would you prefer to secure alternative housing in this neighborhood?" I asked evenly, gesturing toward the window overlooking the tree-lined street. "I understand the new development across the park has vacancies. However, their 2-bedroom units begin at approximately double the rate I'm proposing." My mother stood up suddenly, gathering her papers with shaking hands, her manicured fingers trembling with suppressed rage. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice lacked its usual authoritative edge. "Your grandmother had no right." "She had every right," I cut in firmly, standing my ground with the same unflinching resolve I applied to my medical research. These buildings were Eleanor's legacy, built through her own hard work and vision. She thoughtfully considered how to pass them on, and she chose me as her successor. I picked up my tablet, closing the digital files with a decisive tap. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a virtual meeting scheduled with my property manager to discuss security system upgrades. The current technology is outdated and insufficient. I watched them file out of my apartment, noting the different reactions playing across their faces. Garrett wouldn't meet my eyes, his shoulders hunched with the unfamiliar weight of consequence. Megan lingered for a moment, her hand protectively cradling her baby bump, her expression conflicted as though she wanted to say something before reluctantly following my brother. Vivian was last, pausing dramatically in the doorway like the final scene of a play. "You've changed, Evelyn," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of accusation and bewilderment. "No," I replied, feeling a surprising sense of liberation in the simple truth. "I've simply stopped compromising my authentic self to meet your expectations. I'm the same person I've always been. You just never took the time to know me." After they left, I moved through my apartment with a strange new awareness of the space. I ran my fingers along the walls Eleanor and I had painted together during my recovery from graduate school burnout. I gazed out the windows where we'd observed countless sunsets while discussing ethics in medical research and the responsibility that comes with innovation. In my home office, I unlocked the secure drawer and retrieved her final letter, stored alongside backup drives containing the crucial legal documents. Remember, she'd written in her distinctive handwriting, "Sometimes the most effective response to manipulation is simply being thoroughly prepared." And perhaps the most valuable gift we can offer others is allowing them to experience the natural consequences of their choices. I smiled with bittersweet appreciation, thinking of how Eleanor had anticipated this scenario years ago, using her educator's foresight to prepare me. My phone chimed with an incoming message, a text from Megan. "Can we discuss the apartment next door privately?" Just the two of us, without family interference? This unexpected development suggested that something positive might emerge from this conflict after all. But first, I needed to upgrade the security systems on both properties. Eleanor's practical wisdom echoed in my mind. Strategic preparation prevented unnecessary complications. Outside my windows, the city continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the family drama that had just unfolded within these walls. I had substantial responsibilities awaiting my attention. My medical research team expected me back from leave next week. The properties required management, and I needed to establish appropriate boundaries with my family. But for this moment, I simply stood in my sunlit kitchen, in my rightfully owned home, and allowed myself to experience the quiet satisfaction of maintaining my integrity. The following days brought an unexpected whirlwind of activity. First came a series of increasingly agitated calls from my father Harold, who had been conspicuously absent during the initial confrontation. "Your mother is absolutely distraught," he said, his voice carrying that familiar undertone of disappointment that had colored so many of our interactions throughout my life. "How could you publicly humiliate the family like this?" I was in my home lab, carefully calibrating a prototype medical device for post-accident patient rehabilitation when he called. "Humiliate the family?" I repeated with clinical precision, adjusting a sensor component with steady hands. "By legally owning property that was rightfully transferred to me? Or by preventing you from unlawfully selling my residence out from under me?" "Don't be deliberately difficult, Evelyn." Harold sighed with the practiced weariness of someone accustomed to being the reasonable parent. "We were trying to help your brother establish his family. That's what families do. They support each other." "That's fascinating," I replied, setting down my tools and removing my protective glasses. "I don't recall any of you offering support when I was sleeping on a hospital cot in Eleanor's room during her final months, or when I was recovering from the lab accident that nearly ended my research career." The silence on his end was revealing. Finally, he exhaled heavily. Your mother is consulting with our attorney about challenging the validity of the deed transfer. She's certainly welcome to pursue that approach, I responded evenly. Mr. Patterson has maintained comprehensive documentation, including time-stamped video recordings of every meeting and signature, plus Eleanor's medical competency evaluations. But if you prefer to waste considerable financial resources on legal fees rather than accepting documented reality, that remains your prerogative. Shortly after he disconnected, I heard a tentative knock at my door. Megan stood awkwardly in the entryway, looking noticeably more vulnerable without Garrett or my mother flanking her sides. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" she asked, one hand resting protectively on her slight baby bump. "I brought a peace offering." She held up a bag from the organic bakery near her former elementary school. I gestured toward a stool by my work counter. "Those had better contain their signature lemon tarts." She managed a hesitant smile, opening the familiar recyclable box. "And almond croissants. I remembered you mentioning they helped you focus during your medical patent application process last year." We sat in contemplative silence for a moment, the comforting aroma of butter and almonds mingling with the antiseptic smell of my lab equipment. Finally, Megan gathered her courage to speak. "I had no knowledge of any of this," she said softly, her teacher's voice returning in her careful articulation. "Garrett told me your parents were giving us the apartment as a baby gift to help us start our family. I never imagined." She trailed off, looking genuinely distressed. "You never imagined they were attempting to appropriate my home without my consent or knowledge," I completed her thought. She flinched at the directness, but nodded in agreement. "Garrett insisted they had discussed everything with you, that you were perfectly comfortable relocating to a smaller place since your medical research consumes so much of your time and attention." She broke off a piece of croissant without eating it, avoiding eye contact. "I should have verified the situation with you personally. I should have questioned the arrangement." I considered Megan thoughtfully, recalling how she'd entered our family 4 years ago with such enthusiasm and genuine warmth, eager to connect with everyone. I had observed as my mother and Garrett systematically reshaped her identity, pressuring her to abandon her teaching career because a respectable wife doesn't need professional employment, encouraging increasingly expensive consumer habits because appearances are paramount in their social circles. "Regarding the apartment in the adjacent building," I said, surprising myself with the offer. "The proposal remains available. 3rd floor, identical floor plan to this unit. The previous occupants relocated last month, and I was planning comprehensive renovations before listing it." Megan looked up with unexpected hope, visible relief flooding her face. "Really? You'd still consider us as tenants?" "Even after what we attempted to do." "On one condition," I said firmly, my professional demeanor returning. "This arrangement remains strictly between us. No family manipulation tactics. No reporting every detail back to my mother. If you and Garrett want to rent this property, it will be handled as a proper business arrangement. I'll offer you a fair market rate, but I expect the entire transaction to be conducted professionally." "Garrett won't appreciate that approach," Megan admitted with a sigh of resignation. "He's always maintained that family members shouldn't have to pay each other for anything." "And how effectively has that philosophy worked for his career trajectory?" I asked pointedly, thinking of his string of failed startup ventures, each one generously funded by my parents' seemingly bottomless financial resources and misplaced confidence. Perhaps it's time to establish a healthier pattern of interaction. Megan fell silent for several minutes, absently stroking her baby bump while deep in thought. "Could I possibly see the apartment? Just to get a sense of the space and potential?" I retrieved my key fob from the counter. No better time than the present. I have 30 minutes before my next video conference. The adjacent building mirrored my own in architectural design, both structures created by the same renowned architect in the 1920s. The third-floor apartment definitely required substantial work. The hardwood floors showed significant wear. The kitchen featured outdated appliances and cabinetry, and the bathroom fixtures were functional but certainly not modern. However, the fundamental structural elements were exceptional. Tall windows allowed abundant natural light to flood the spaces. High ceilings created an expansive atmosphere, and the overall layout would perfectly accommodate a growing family's needs. "This is absolutely stunning," Megan whispered reverently, her fingers tracing the intricate crown molding that framed the living room ceiling. "Even in this condition, the craftsmanship is extraordinary. It requires comprehensive renovation," I acknowledged, mentally cataloging the necessary improvements. But I was already planning a complete modernization before listing it. "If you're genuinely interested, you could participate in selecting finishes and design elements to customize the space to your preferences." She turned toward me, unexpected tears welling in her eyes. "Why are you extending this kindness to me, after what we attempted to do to you?" "For two reasons," I said straightforwardly. "You're the only family member who has actually apologized for the situation, and I believe you might be ready to stop allowing others to dictate your life choices." At that precise moment, both our phones simultaneously chimed with notification alerts. The family group message thread I had muted several days earlier. My mother had composed an extensive message regarding an emergency family meeting scheduled for the upcoming weekend. "Your father and I have reached several important decisions concerning the future disposition of both properties," she wrote imperiously. "Attendance is absolutely mandatory for all family members." Megan looked at me, unmistakable panic flashing across her expressive face. What could they possibly be planning now? I deleted the message without reading beyond the opening paragraph. Nothing of actual consequence. "They have no legal ownership of these buildings, remember? They can make whatever plans they wish, but they lack the authority to implement them. Garrett will expect me to attend," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "They'll all pressure us to present a united opposition against you. What matters more is what you personally want," I responded. She surveyed the apartment again, her gaze lingering on the potential evident beneath the outdated surfaces. "I want to reclaim my autonomy," she said with newfound conviction. "I want my child to grow up in a home that truly belongs to us, even if we're renting it, rather than something acquired through manipulation and deception." I took out my tablet and quickly composed an email to my trusted contractor. "I can have detailed renovation specifications prepared within the week. Standard lease agreement. Fair market rental rate. First month without charge during the renovation process." I paused, making direct eye contact. "However, Megan, this must be your independent decision. Not influenced by Garrett, not by my mother's expectations. Yours alone." She straightened her posture, displaying more genuine confidence than I'd observed in her since before their wedding. "I'd very much like to review those plans when they're available." As we descended the staircase, my phone alerted me to a new message, this one directly from my father. "Your mother is exploring various legal avenues. Don't force us to escalate this situation further." I showed the text to Megan, who shook her head in obvious disappointment. "They really can't accept boundaries, can they?" "No," I agreed. "But they're about to receive an important life lesson." Observing Megan's newly determined expression, I recognized that something fundamental was shifting. The family power dynamics that had appeared permanently established were beginning to fracture, revealing unexpected possibilities beneath the surface. Perhaps this conflict wasn't merely about defending my property rights anymore. It might represent an opportunity to break destructive patterns that should have been addressed years ago. "Would you be interested in seeing my current research project?" I asked Megan. "I recall you had a particular interest in educational applications of medical technology before my mother convinced you that pursuing a career wasn't appropriate for a wife." Her smile appeared genuinely enthusiastic. "I'd really like that. And Evelyn, Thank you. Not just for the apartment opportunity, but for demonstrating that there's an alternative approach to handling difficult family situations. As we returned to my home laboratory, I reflected on Eleanor's final advice. Sometimes the most effective form of resistance isn't about retaliation, it's about empowering others to break free from unhealthy patterns. The mandatory family gathering was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' expansive suburban residence. I had originally decided against attending until Megan called me in obvious distress the previous evening. "They're developing some kind of strategy," she whispered urgently. "Garrett keeps having private conversations with your father's attorney. They're discussing challenging the inheritance transfer by claiming Eleanor wasn't mentally competent when she transferred ownership to you." I sat in my home office, looking at the framed photograph of Eleanor and me at my first medical device patent approval celebration. "Let them proceed with that approach," I responded calmly. "Mr. Patterson maintains comprehensive video documentation of every meeting and signature, along with Eleanor's medical competency evaluations. She knew precisely what she was doing." "There's more to their plan," Megan continued, her voice betraying her discomfort. "They intend to use my pregnancy as leverage, arguing that we deserve priority consideration because we're starting a family. Garrett has no idea I'm sharing this information with you. I considered Megan's unprecedented choice to stand against family pressure, choosing honesty over blind loyalty. I sincerely appreciate your warning. Will you attend tomorrow's meeting?" "Yes," she confirmed with unexpected resolution. "And I'm finished participating in their manipulative tactics." Sunday arrived with pristine autumn weather, the kind of crisp, clear day Eleanor would have particularly appreciated for its scientific clarity. I arrived at my parents' sprawling suburban residence precisely at the scheduled time, immediately noting the extensive collection of vehicles already parked in the circular driveway. The entire extended family had assembled for what was clearly intended to be a significant confrontation. Inside the meticulously decorated living room, the atmosphere was charged with palpable tension. Vivian sat regally in her favorite imported armchair, positioned like a monarch, presiding over court proceedings, with Harold standing attentively behind her in a practiced show of solidarity. Garrett paced nervously by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his expensive shoes wearing a path in the plush carpet. Various aunts, uncles, and distant relatives occupied the remaining seating, their expressions ranging from curious to uncomfortable. Megan sat noticeably separate from the main family grouping, meeting my eyes with quiet resolve as I entered the room. "Evelyn," my mother addressed me with glacial formality, "how thoughtful of you to actually join us." "I wouldn't miss such an important family discussion," I replied evenly, deliberately remaining standing to maintain my professional composure. "Though I'm genuinely curious about the purpose of this gathering, considering the property ownership situation has already been legally resolved." My father stepped forward with rehearsed authority, holding an official-looking leather portfolio. "We've been conducting a thorough review of the circumstances surrounding your grandmother's decisions. Our attorney has expressed significant concerns regarding her mental competency during those final months." "Is that so?" I maintained my clinical tone, the same one I used when presenting controversial research findings. "You're referring to the months when I was personally managing her medical care, while the rest of you were consistently unavailable? You deliberately manipulated her." Garrett interjected harshly, his face flushing with anger. "You strategically turned her against the family during her most vulnerable period." Before I could formulate a response, Megan unexpectedly rose to her feet. "No, she didn't. I visited occasionally during that time, if you recall, when none of you made yourselves available." Eleanor was exceptionally sharp and lucid until the very end. She understood exactly what she was doing with her property. An absolute silence descended upon the room. Garrett stared at his wife with undisguised shock. Megan, sit down immediately. This situation doesn't involve you directly, doesn't it? She moved deliberately to stand beside me, her teacher's confidence returning to her posture. You're attempting to misappropriate someone else's home, using our unborn child as justification. I refuse to participate in such behavior. My mother's expression darkened ominously. Megan, darling, you're clearly emotionally overwhelmed. Pregnancy hormones can severely affect rational thinking. Please stop. Megan interrupted with unexpected firmness. Don't attempt to dismiss my perspective as mere hormonal irrationality. Evelyn has offered us a beautiful apartment with fair rental terms and the opportunity to create our own legitimate home. But that's insufficient for this family, isn't it? The constant need to possess and control everything overrides all other considerations. I reached for my tablet, navigating to a specific video file. Before this discussion proceeds any further, there's something important you should all watch. I wirelessly connected to the large wall-mounted display, and suddenly Eleanor's face appeared on screen, her expression serious, but eyes sharp with intelligence. I'm recording this statement, she began with characteristic directness, because I understand my daughter's tendencies. Vivian never forgave me for refusing to transfer control of these properties to her upon her marriage. But property ownership transcends mere possession. It embodies responsible stewardship. Evelyn comprehends this principle. She's developed meaningful innovations, assisted others in building their aspirations. These properties belong to her through proper legal channels. Any attempt to contest this arrangement will merely expose your own avarice. The recording continued, documenting Eleanor clearly articulating her wishes, signing the necessary documents, with Mr. Patterson meticulously verifying each step of the process. When the video concluded, the room remained in profound silence. Extensive additional documentation exists, I stated quietly. Would you like to examine the comprehensive medical evaluations confirming Eleanor's mental competence? The multiple witness statements? The neurological assessments? How far are you prepared to pursue this fundamentally flawed challenge? My father dropped his portfolio onto the coffee table. My mother's complexion had lost all color. But it was Garrett's reaction that proved most unexpected. You knew about this, he accused Megan, his voice strained with betrayal. You knew about the apartment next door. You've been communicating with her behind my back. Megan straightened her posture, standing firmly by her principles. Yes, because Evelyn is the only person who has demonstrated genuine honesty throughout this situation. The only one who offered us a legitimate opportunity rather than schemes and manipulative tactics. The comprehensive renovation specifications have been finalized, I added calmly. If you remain interested. However, this situation concludes now. No further challenges. No additional threats. The buildings legally belong to me, and that determination is absolute. My mother stood abruptly, her carefully maintained composure visibly cracking. I believe this meeting is finished. Everyone should leave immediately. We require time to process this information. As we departed, Megan deliberately took my arm. I'm very interested in reviewing those renovation plans, she announced, projecting her voice clearly for everyone to hear. For what will become our new home. Outside, the autumn sun was descending toward the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the manicured lawn. Megan and I walked to our vehicles together, leaving behind the unmistakable sounds of heated argument emanating from the house. They'll never genuinely forgive either of us for this, she observed quietly. I reflected on Eleanor's wisdom regarding stewardship and creating something meaningful. Perhaps not, but we'll construct something more valuable instead. 8 months later, I stood in the thoroughly renovated apartment in the adjacent building, observing Megan arrange a selection of educational toys in the sunlight-filled living room. Her pregnancy had progressed significantly, and the dedicated nursery down the hall had been completely prepared with state-of-the-art monitoring technology I had personally designed. The comprehensive renovation had transformed the space remarkably. Sustainable bamboo flooring, expansive open-concept living areas, and a kitchen featuring the latest energy-efficient appliances. The integrated air purification system was absolutely worth the additional investment, Megan commented, adjusting the positioning of a developmental learning station. She had reconnected with her educational background, even launching a small educational consulting business, providing resources for early childhood development. Though Garrett is still adapting to the concept of making regular rent payments, the period following the family confrontation had initiated substantial changes. Garrett, confronted with losing both his wife's unquestioning support and his parents' financial backing, had finally accepted a legitimate position with a technology consulting firm. While he still maintained his distance from me, Megan reported noticeable changes in his home behavior. Increased focus, diminished sense of entitlement, and growing accountability. My parents had cycled through predictable stages, first implementing complete communication withdrawal, then attempting emotional manipulation through guilt, and finally progressing to reluctant acknowledgement of reality. The significant turning point occurred during the winter holidays, when my mother unexpectedly appeared at my door, appearing noticeably older and uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been reflecting on Eleanor's perspective," she admitted hesitantly, avoiding direct eye contact, "about the concept of stewardship and creating meaningful value." She inhaled deeply before continuing. "I never actually built anything substantial. I simply anticipated receiving everything through entitlement." Now, observing Megan coordinating preparations for her upcoming baby shower, notably the first family gathering since our confrontation, I reflected on the remarkable extent of transformation that had occurred. "Your mother confirmed her attendance," Megan mentioned, accurately reading my contemplative expression. "She specifically asked permission to bring her signature lemon bars for the refreshment table." I raised an eyebrow with genuine surprise. The legendary lemon bars with the recipe she's guarded like classified research data for decades? "She actually offered to teach me the complete preparation process," Megan replied, a hopeful smile brightening her face. "Small incremental progress, wouldn't you agree?" My tablet chimed with an incoming notification, a message from my property management software about a long-term commercial tenant requiring maintenance assistance with their ventilation system. Under my stewardship, both buildings had developed into thriving ecosystems. I had implemented a specialized program offering affordable commercial space to promising small business entrepreneurs, witnessing their innovative concepts take root and flourish. "Read?" a voice called politely from the corridor. It was Camila Suarez, one of my commercial tenants, who operated a successful custom textile business in the ground floor retail space. "I've completed the specialized curtains for the nursery and brought some homemade empanadas prepared according to my grandmother's traditional recipe." This was precisely the supportive community Eleanor had envisioned. Diverse individuals collaborating and supporting one another, constructing something meaningful together. As Megan and Camilla engaged in animated discussion about the curtain installation and exchanged family recipes, I quietly withdrew to my own apartment across the courtyard. In my home office, I unlocked the secure drawer where I preserved Eleanor's final correspondence. The paper showed signs of handling, but her precise handwriting remained perfectly legible. "Real property transcends mere physical structures and land," she had written with characteristic insight. "It represents creating environments where individuals can develop their potential, where genuine communities can flourish." You comprehend this principle in ways Vivian never managed to grasp. A decisive knock at my door interrupted my reflections. To my considerable surprise, Garrett stood in the entryway, his normally confident demeanor replaced with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Do you have time to talk?" he asked, his expression reflecting both discomfort and determination about everything that's happened. We settled in my kitchen, the same space where our confrontation had initiated these changes months earlier. Garrett stared intently into his coffee cup, visibly organizing his thoughts. Megan demonstrates a happiness I've never witnessed before, he finally acknowledged. The apartment, her educational consulting work, even her newfound confidence in expressing opinions to our parents. And regarding your own experience? I inquired carefully, maintaining my objective tone. I'm undergoing a significant learning process, he admitted candidly. Genuine professional responsibilities, actual accountability for results. It's dramatically different, challenging at times, but ultimately more fulfilling. He raised his eyes to meet mine directly. I owe you an apology, Evelyn, for attempting to appropriate your residence, for failing to establish appropriate boundaries with our parents earlier. Before I could formulate a response, my tablet signaled another notification, a message from my property management system regarding a prospective commercial tenant, an innovative bakery specializing in allergen-free products seeking expansion space. Would you be interested in observing something important? I asked Garrett. A principal Eleanor understood that required significant time for me to fully comprehend. I guided him through the commercial spaces on the ground floor, introducing him to Camilla at her textile studio, to Oliver Kang's specialized bookstore focusing on scientific literature, and to the recently established gallery showcasing medical illustrations by local artists. Each space contained a unique narrative of innovation and personal development. This represents the essential purpose, I explained, gesturing toward the vibrant commercial corridor. Not merely property ownership, but creating environments where individuals can succeed through their own efforts and establish genuine independence. Garrett remained thoughtfully silent before responding. Similar to Megan with her educational consulting, comparable to your medical research innovations. Precisely. I turned to face him directly. The apartment never simply represented living accommodations. It embodied the freedom to develop something meaningful according to my own vision and values. Later that evening, as I assisted Megan with finalizing preparations for her baby shower, I contemplated the concept of family, not merely biological connections, but the supportive networks we consciously cultivate. Camilla had contributed additional homemade specialties. Oliver provided a selection of developmental psychology books for parents. And remarkably, my mother had called offering to arrive early to help with arrangements. I extended invitations to Eleanor's former colleagues from the university. Megan informed me while arranging personalized place cards on the gift display. They frequently inquire about your progress, you know. They express genuine pride regarding how you've managed this challenging situation. The following morning, I stood in my kitchen again, experiencing a distinctly different emotional response to the space. Through the window, I observed early sunlight illuminating both buildings, the sidewalks already animated with people commuting to work and educational institutions. Within hours, these same pathways would welcome family members and friends, gathering to celebrate new life and possibilities. My phone signaled one final message, this one from my mother. Would additional setup assistance be helpful? I've prepared the lemon bars and brought printed copies of the complete recipe. I smiled, reflecting on Eleanor's wisdom regarding stewardship and developmental growth. Sometimes maintaining your principles isn't merely about protecting personal assets. It's about creating environments where everyone can evolve into improved versions of themselves. Outside, the city awakened to another day of possibilities. Soon my home would resonate with celebratory conversation, a family attempting reconciliation, a community strengthening connections. The historic buildings stood resilient and proud, as they had for generations, but now contained fresh narratives and aspirations. This, I realized, constituted the most valuable inheritance possible. Epilogue. Surveying both properties now, I comprehended what Eleanor had understood throughout her lifetime. The purpose was never excluding others, but rather creating something worth sharing and preserving. A legacy transcending mere property, embodying genuine possibility. The morning sunlight reflected brilliantly from the windows of both buildings, transforming them into beacons in the early light. Below, Camilla was preparing her studio for customers. Oliver arranged scientific journals in his display window, and Megan was likely already organizing educational materials for the celebration. This represented authentic success, not merely prevailing in conflict, but establishing something more meaningful in its aftermath, something destined to endure long after disagreements faded from memory. I opened my digital messaging group with Megan and Camilla. Breakfast before today's festivities begin? I'm brewing coffee. Their responses arrived immediately, enthusiastic and warmly affirmative. In my kitchen, I activated the coffee brewing system, arranged freshly baked pastries on serving plates, and opened the windows to welcome the morning breeze. This constituted genuine home, not merely the physical apartment, but the entire interconnected community we had established together. And this time, it rested upon a foundation sufficiently resilient to endure.